I'm Suzanne Hurton-Roberts. I want to welcome everyone. I'm the current president of Wapa. I'm glad that you're all here. Tonight, we're really privileged to hear from the 2019 Praxis Award winners. Excuse me. Since 1981. I'm thinking of the flu. Wapa's held the biennial Praxis Award competition to recognize outstanding achievement in translating anthropological knowledge into action as reflected in a single project or a specific endeavor. And congratulations to all the awardees for their achievements. This is going to be a wonderful evening. I'm sorry, I have allergy. The Praxis Award involves months and months of hard work every 2 years on the part of many, many people. So please join me in thanking first Rob Winthrop for chairing the 2019 Praxis Committee, carrying out the many tasks and providing leadership for the entire effort. Let's also extend our sincere gratitude to the 2019 Praxis Committee, consisting of Charles Chaney, Patricia Clay, Shirley Fisk, Terry Redding, Rob Winthrop, who's the chair, and Bob Wolf. We'd also like to thank the 2019 Praxis jurors, Mark Edberg, Kerry Fosher, Eric Kildegard, I hope I didn't mess up your name, Eric, and Aaron Taylor. So thanks to all these people, it truly takes, if not a village, at least many, many people on committees to bring about these awards. And thanks to all of them. I've been a juror and I've been on the committee and I know the amount of work it takes. So thank you all. I'd also like to introduce the chair of WAPA's program committee, Monica Gomez. Monica started this year as our new chair, and so far we've just had some fabulous presentations, some fabulous meetings. So Monica's doing great. She just jumped in and started running. And I want to thank her especially for getting all these awardees together so we can hear about their work. So thanks, Monica, for all your work, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's so lovely of you to say those nice comments. I appreciate that. And I want to issue a warm welcome to everyone out there. We are very lucky to have such a full crowd tonight, and we're really honored to have the special guests that are presenting this evening that represent a truly global community. I'm not going to take much time away from the presenters, so I just want to provide a quick reminder that our next event for December is going to be held the first week of the month. We're looking at either the 2nd or the 3rd. We still have a few confirmations to go through on that, but the topic relates to the anthropology of resilience. So it should be a rather interesting conversation for that month. I'd like to now turn it over to Rob Winthrop, and he is going to be our MC for the evening. So without further ado, take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Monica. Everybody can hear me, I guess. So first, don't want to spend too much time thanking people because I believe most people would really rather hear our speakers, but I do want to thank Suzanne for her leadership at WAPA and Monica, who has inexplicably gone blank, for leading the there she is, for being such a great lead for the program committee and making all of these arrangements. So since we are under COVID terms, not meeting in person, or we would not be able to all meet in person in any case, but I'm at home and it's happy hour. So although you may not have a drink in hand, I'm going to lift my glass to WAPA, to my colleagues, to our judges, and to my fellow members of the WAPA Praxis Committee, and in particular to our winners. Congratulations, and may anthropology rejoice. Okay, so I was the chair of the Praxis committee for the 2019 competition. This is about the 40th, I'm sorry if I'm squeaking, this is about the 40th year, 40, that Wapa has done the Praxis Award. So starting in the early 80s, mostly it has been done every other year, which is our current practice of Praxis. And that's really a very, to me, impressive history. And when some of my fellow committee members arm-twisted me to serve as chair, I had successfully resisted in the past, just out of self-interest and self-preservation. Before making a decision, I went through the list of the previous winners. And I must say which is posted on the Wapa website, wapadc.org. And I have to say, I was really quite impressed and humbled by the number of outstanding anthropologists and outstanding work that has been recognized over the past 40 years. I also want to acknowledge in particular two colleagues who were there at the beginning, Bob Wolf and Shirley Fisk, who really made this award come into being. So a great thanks to them, and they have been involved on and off, probably mostly on, ever since, and are current members of the Praxis committee. So what is, for those who may not know, and probably most people on the call do know, so I won't spend too much time here, but what does the Praxis Award honor, and what are we looking for? So, it's a somewhat unusual award among the array, at least in the United States, that are given out. It is intended to recognize outstanding achievement in translating anthropological knowledge into action. I emphasize into action, as reflected in a single project or specific endeavor. And so it's not a lifetime achievement award. There are a number of colleagues who have done work that has been very action-oriented, but that have been sort of long, ongoing things. That's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for more discrete, excuse me, actions, generally with sponsors, interested parties that lead to concrete outcomes. And all three of our winners, two of the winners are actually teams, demonstrate that very well. So for some years, the Praxis committee has been seeking to make this a more international effort. and building on this past year, the committee made more of an outreach effort. We had a number of highly innovative proposals from Germany, Great Britain, Israel, Uruguay, excuse me, and the United States. I'm losing my voice. So that was very heartening. We gave unusually two winners as well as one honorable mention. The winners being Professor Nayana Kamukherji, whom we will hear from shortly, Professor Michael Paolisso and his colleagues from the University of Maryland, as well as the really great work that Laurie Schwady, that Dr. Schwede and her team at the Census Bureau have done, which was given an honorable mention. Okay, moving on, and hoping my voice will last for a moment. We are first honoring Professor Nayana Kamukherji. She is Professor of Political Anthropology at Durham University in the United Kingdom. She works and publishes on gendered violence in conflicts, reconciliation, reconciliation, ethics, and transnational adoption. The project that won the award is based on her award-winning book, another award, Award Squared, The Spectral Wound, Sexual Violence, Public Memories, and the Bangladesh War of 1971. Committee felt this was a very impressive project addressing issues of sexual violence in warfare. So I'm going to turn it over to our colleague I've unfortunately never met in person, but I hope to someday, Professor Nayana Kamukherji.
Thank you so much, Professor Winthrop. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everyone on the committee. It is a pleasure to be here, I feel a bit lost for words, but it's great to be here and also to be here on this momentous day. As Rob has said, my kind of research background kind of emerges from these I've been working in Bangladesh for a long time. I'm myself from India, but I read, write, and speak the same language. I'm on the other side of the border, which was partitioned by the British. So I'm in the Indian side, and Bangladesh is on the other side. So we share my home region shares a kind of boundary with Bangladesh itself. And so yes, as in some ways kind of trying to figure out what the praxis, the translating anthropological knowledge into action has a kind of double layer in this project. It, as Rob said, it's primarily comes from my book, which has been translated, into a graphic novel and animation film. And I think I should just share my PowerPoint, which I've forgotten to share. Just do that. Hang on. So it's been translated into a graphic novel and animation film. And what was particularly great in terms of getting the award, and just to backtrack, the animation film and the graphic novel has proposed a set of guidelines for various organizations and governments who are working with survivors of sexual violence. And these guidelines emerge from the ethnography. So it's been translated into an accessible format of that of the graphic novel, and now also an animation film. So, and this could be easily disseminated among various organizations itself. So what was particularly important and interesting when the award came was the lockdown also happened right at the same time, and the royalties of the book, which I've been fortunate to have had, I've been fortunate to get a good amount of royalty from the book, and each time I've been able to send them to the survivors and their families and communities. And the Wapa award also came at a certain time when many of the survivors whose family members are working as garment workers in various industries that shut down because of COVID. And this money, which I also wanted to give to the survivors right away, went to the survivors at a very, very important time. In fact, one of the survivors, her grandchild, could continue to take online classes because we ended up also getting him a laptop. So it's come at the award has meant more than you might imagine to many of the survivors and many of the women and their families that I have been working with. So a big heartfelt thank you from not just from me, but also a community of survivors whose work is central and foundational to this graphic novel and this film and the book itself. So I just wanted to say that first before I forget. in describing the project itself. So I'm going to share my screen now in terms of trying to kind of identify where the project is. So just give me a moment. I mostly have some images rather than the text. I'll be speaking from the text itself. So don't, it's sharing the screen, right? Yeah. Okay, 1 second. I need to get to my page from which I need to read. Sorry. So primarily the project emerges from, as Rob said, with the introduction itself, it emerges from the book, but also I'm just going to kind of find my page. Sorry about this, and how I need to pick up my own screen up here. Okay. Set full screen. Yeah. Okay, and then. Sorry, here we go. Okay, I'm just going to find the points because it's difficult to have the screen up as well as look at the text that I want to speak on. So I'm actually going to leave the PowerPoint for now. I think I'm going to speak now, and then I can show you some of the images later on. It's fine. It was mostly images. So the motivation for the work emerges from the book, which is called Spectral Wound, Sexual Violence, Public Memories, and the Bangladesh War of 1971. And the motivation for doing this work is actually quite personal to me, and that is something I wanted to share. And this goes back to, and actually has resonance maybe with some of the things we are going through today in today's world and politics. It goes back to 1992 when I was an undergraduate student in India, in Calcutta, my home city, and when the Babri Masjid was attacked by right-wing forces.
And that is where it stands until we get to the canvas, which happens later, where they might find a few theirs. But
hi, if everyone could please mute their mics with the exception of the speaker, that would be really great. Thank you so much.
So it was it concurred with the attack on a mosque in India by right-wing forces, and that was my first kind of formative political event when we went down into curfew, kind of a lockdown with more of the army being out. And there was a rumor about intercommunity sexual violence. Muslims over Hindu women and Hindu men over Muslim women. This was also the time when sexual violence during conflict was in the news, with Rwanda, Bosnia happening. Japan was being asked to apologize. The UN came up with the kind of declaring rape as a war crime. And so while this was happening, I was also kind of taught about various feminist sensibilities. And here, what was particularly interesting is that in Bangladesh, there was the government had publicly referred to women who had been raped by the Pakistani army and the local collaborators as Virangona, the term meaning war heroines. So in some ways, this was defying the existing idea that wartime sexual violence is consigned to silence. Instead, Bangladesh has publicly legislated, this is in government documents, parliamentary proceedings, to refer to the women, the very large number of women who were raped as war heroines. So my work kind of picks up on that idea of the public memory, and and when I went to Bangladesh, I found there was no silence, and in fact there was this extensive public memory, and which I wanted to show some of these images of the public memory existing in photographs, in films, in poetry, in museums, in rickshaw art. And at the same time, in the 1990s, late 1990s, many of the women were speaking publicly, coming forward and speaking publicly about their wartime sexual violence for various sets of reasons. So the book kind of brings together a triangulation of ethnography among survivors, their families and communities, as well as state actors and human rights activists, and of that literary and visual representations happening over the entire spectrum since 1971. So in terms of methods, I kind of worked ethnographically with 11 survivors as well as their families and communities who were publicly known and speaking about the experiences on their own volition, as well as all the kind of representational aspect that was prevalent, the literary and visual ones, as well as activists and state officials. And here I found that not only that there was no silence, which defied existing ideas of silence about wartime rape, but also what I found emerging among various non-governmental organizations are kind of prevalent questions about the war heroines, if they were married, if they had a family, if they had in-laws. And when I would say, yes, these women were still married to the husband with whom they were with when they were raped, it would be really seen as a surprise. And increasingly, I found that within the presentation of the war heroine, or Birangana, and also within the activist community, there existed of the idea of the raped woman as a horrific figure who is marked by either being physically affected or not having any kinship, nurturance of or kin network. And also I found the third issue was that there was no focus on the post-conflict trajectory of these war heroines. There was only a focus on a voyeuristic account of what happened to them in terms of wartime rape. And so for me, the ethnography revealed that actually various unethical, unintended, and maybe well-intentioned activists were actually carrying out various kind of unethical practices in the process of pursuing testimonies. So the very testimonial culture among the survivors became very, very problematic. And this is exactly what the survivors wanted to talk to me about in terms of, and it kind of generated the survivor-led guidelines that is central and foundational to this project itself. And this is something that has emerged for me with a long-standing relationship with ethics. Of that, I have been the ethics officer of the Association of Social Anthropologists in UK and Commonwealth, which is the main UK organization comparable to the AAA. In UK, and I kind of totally rehauled the ethics code in 2011. And also these guidelines became quite important in Bangladesh right now, because many of these war heroines are right now on government lists because they are being provided pensions and a package. So issues of anonymity kind of completely goes out of the window, because they are actually, there are online details about the women within government documents itself. And this is also women for themselves find that this is the way they can, by putting their name forward, they can also access government funds for specifically meant for women who were raped during the Bangladesh war. And this is prevalent even right now. And also these guidelines have become even more relevant because in the last decade, we find a lot of similar transgressions of ethical practices being undertaken by various Western journalists, government organizations who are working with the Rohingya refugees. And because of these transgressions of the Rohingya refugees, the UK government's Foreign and Commonwealth Office's Prevent Sexual Violence Initiative started developing the Murad Code based on Nadia Murad, who was a 2018 one of the Nobel Peace Prize awardees, who is a Yazidi sexual violence survivor. So, and this is where the guideline and the graphic novel has directly contributed to the development of the Murad Code, which has been referenced by the FCO here. So for me, the work has emerged in terms of developing the graphic novel in collaboration with my partners, Research Initiatives Bangladesh, who are mentioned in the blurb, as well as work with a young visual artist based in Bangladesh, who's fantastic, Najmuna Harkeya. So one of the central findings in the book was how survivors found the process of giving testimonies a transgressive process. And so the goal of the project was to contribute to the welfare of survivors by taking on board what they considered should be the guidelines when people come and work with them, so that the process of giving testimonies doesn't become another source of trauma, along with experiences of sexual violence itself. So in some ways, in having developed the graphic novel based on these guidelines, and it was quite challenging for us, I write much more easily than I can translate it into a visual text, was completely out of my depth. So I was doing the storyboards and Kea was obviously visualizing them. We initially had the guidelines developed through a set of workshops at Research Initiatives Bangladesh, as well as LSC's Women, Peace and Security Center. So these were the two places where the workshops happened. And different sets of government officials, as well as civil society actors, organizations primarily working with survivors of sexual violence and conflict, were involved in these workshops and feeding back on what the guidelines should be, and the next stage, what the graphic novel should be. So we had kind of various 6 workshops across the two organizations, which enable us to build this up and work on it. And after having developed the graphic novel, it was important for me to understand how the organizations who are working with survivors were going to use these graphic novel and guidelines, how we get survivor feedback on this as well. So this is the various ways in which the guidelines have been used for teaching, and because in some ways they are a list of ethical practices, while the graphic novel kind of visualizes the list based on the research, making it more accessible itself. So some of the participants for these workshops, or who have been using these graphic novel and guidelines, apart from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the UK government, it's also been the Bangladesh government who's planning to include these guidelines as part of their policies, which is underway right now, but also the press in Bangladesh as well as in UK, and also various NGOs working with survivors of sexual violence, notable among them in Bangladesh being Aino Shalish Kendro, Nari Pokko, who are working with the Rohingya refugees, as well as dealing with issues of sexual violence on an everyday basis, because these guidelines are relevant for that as well. And at the international level, there has been the Dennis Mukwege Foundation. Again, Dr. Mukwege was one of the other Nobel Peace Prize recipients in 2018 with Nadia Murad. He works primarily in DRC, in Congo. Then Amnesty International, Survivors Network. So actually these graphic novel and also the animation film has gone to survivors in Colombia and DRC via the Mukwege Foundation more recently. So the graphic novel, just to say very short, kind of focuses around a tri-generational, intergenerational story between a grandmother, a daughter, and a grandchild, and the conversation focuses on an oral history project and the discovery of the grandchild of an intricate family history within it. And I was able to intersperse various archival images with the graphic novel in setting up the various kind of guidelines. And this is there's a website available for it, which I can put in the chat, from which the graphic novel and the animation film can be downloaded, can be seen downloaded as well for free, and it is available in English and Bangla. And that has been really, really important to have it in Bangla, because it has reached in rural areas in Bangladesh as well. So it was really important to have it in Bangla. So, and one of the quotes as a result from the Birangonas was that they said, "We cried and laughed on reading this book and seeing this film. It should be read and seen by all children and their parents. By reading this book and seeing this film, children will not question the war again. No one will question who fought. No one will ever give scorn to the Birangonas. along with the children, their parents would read, their mothers would read, and they would get to know about the war. All our stories are here in this book, and I want this book to be in every school in Bangladesh so that all children know about us. So this has come, and this was quite heartening to know, and they were also laughing about some of the incidents that was there in the graphic novel, to say, oh, you even put this in? So it also had, it's a heavy topic, but it also had an element of dark humor and affectionate exchange within in being able to carry out this project. So in terms of the conclusions and the findings of the study, not only it counters the idea of silence, I show how that survivors are speaking because of various kinds of reasons. It also highlights the varied contexts and everyday experiences of rape among survivors and how they develop resilience itself. And if I have some time at the end, I might show you a small clip from the film itself.
Nayana, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to stop you right there because I think that would be a great point in order to bring on the next speaker, but I think that will be a great segue into some of our questions for our audience members. So I don't mean to cut you off there. If I can pause you right there, and we can, we will definitely entertain those questions and certainly look forward to the visuals that you're looking forward to sharing with everyone. That would be great. Thank you.
So shall I show the clip now?
Actually, we're going to turn it over to Michael right now, just because we're going to make sure that we stay on time. And but definitely during the Q&A segment, definitely show the clip, please.
Okay, and because I've used up my 20 minutes now, right? Yeah, okay. So just to say, the new kind of development of this is a film, and there are other findings and conclusions, but we can talk about that later on. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. That was really fascinating. We're going to turn it out now over to Dr. Michael Paolisso. He was another one of the Praxis winners for the 2019 awards. And his specific topic deals with the Deal Island Peninsula project. I'm going to let him go ahead and take over to present. I won't take any of his time. So Michael, it's your turn.
Okay. Thank you, Monica. I want to thank Wapa for this award for our team. And I'm at the University of Maryland, and I've until recently lived in DC. I was a Wapa member early on in my career there. So to receive this award in recognition for the work we've been doing is particularly special. And I'm really very, very impressed with all the work that Wapa does. And many of our students have attended your meetings over the year and benefited greatly, and also from your mentorship and tutoring of the students. I am going to talk today about the Deal Island Peninsula Partnership. I'm going to share my screen here first. Can people see that?
Perfect.
Yeah? Okay, great. So I have about 12 slides here, and I wanted to give you a visual and a little bit of text, but I just want to mainly talk about our project and talk about how I think it's an evolving application of anthropological knowledge to do applied work. You're looking at part of the Deal Island Peninsula, which I'll show you in a few seconds, which is on where it's located at. And just as maybe part of the Praxis, can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so this is where I am right now. I live out here now, so I've taken my Praxis work to new levels and new integration out here. So, and listed here are my co-awardees, Elizabeth Vandola, Catherine Johnson, Christy Miller Hesed, all were PhD students at Maryland, did their dissertation research in and around this area, then worked on the partnership as postdocs, and all of them have gone on to other work. They're still involved in the project, still maintain affiliation with Maryland, but also have moved on to other research projects, etc. So just to orient you where we're at, you can see in the upper left, Washington, D.C., the star. We're on the East Coast of the United States for our international participants. And we're close to the largest estuary in the United States, the Chesapeake Bay. And the Deal Island Peninsula is on the lower eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, about 150 miles from Washington, D.C., about a 3 hours drive. And here you can see an insert of the peninsula itself. It's about 25 square miles and includes salt marsh areas, extensive salt marsh areas, some owned by the state of Maryland, this wildlife management area, and some also managed by the federal government through the NOAA, the National Research Reserve, Estuarine Reserve System. The middle green are uplands of the peninsula, and these names here are names of communities that are on the peninsula. And so we're predominantly marsh with some islands of upland land with elevation on average only 3 feet above sea level. So if you come over to this picture here, you can see this is marsh back here. And so it's a very low-lying area, prone to flooding, at risk of storms, etc. Historically been a community of commercial fishermen, still is today. Most people here that were born and raised here are involved in the seafood industry. Our #1 harvest here is blue crabs, for which the Chesapeake Bay is famous, along with oysters. These are small communities, very religious, evangelical Christian Methodists that began in the late 19th century. And here's a picture of a revival, summer revival out on the island. All said, about 1,000 people living in this 25 square mile area. One of the biggest challenges we have is flooding and sea level rise, erosion, issues being brought on, issues that were already here that are being exacerbated by a changing climate. We in the Deal Island Peninsula Partnership, we on our website, we present results of research where we've done modeling of projected sea level rise and provided community residents with maps where they could locate their property on and see what are the predicted impacts of sea level rise and flooding. The type of flooding that we experience here, we can experience sort of tidal flooding. We can experience sort of storm and rainfall flooding where the water table rises as the ground becomes saturated. So this center picture here is not an uncommon event. In fact, my front yard can often look like this a little bit, where after a heavy storm that we had last week, we have water on the surface of the yards, and it takes a couple tidal cycles to get it off. We have nuisance flooding that blocks roads, maybe not completely, like you can drive through this, but there are times when this type of flooding will stop school buses or other vehicles from getting down. It's quite inconvenient for people living down this road to get in and out. And we also have, in addition to flooding, one of the other sort of impacts that's being exacerbated by climate change is shoreline erosion. And you can see an example down here. So the Deal Island Peninsula Partnership really began as a specific project back in 2012. It was funded by NOAA, the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. They had a science collaborative RFP, and along with an ecologist, soil scientist at the University of Maryland, we responded to the RFP. I had been working out in this area doing environmental anthropology field work since probably around 2000. And we had done some smaller projects, and I had done other research on broader issues in broader areas for the Chesapeake Bay since about that time as well. But I had been working out here, and I knew the communities, and I had rapport with a number of people out here. And so we thought this would be a great site to do this collaborative science. And so starting off, we didn't think that we would create this partnership, which is still going on and evolving, particularly in the time of COVID and more online technology, creating a more extensive community. So we started with a collaborative science, kind of very traditional. I think applied anthropology, we're bringing social science research and ecological research together with local community knowledge. And you'll see on the right here, throughout all of the work we've been doing since 2012, we've used a collaborative learning approach that comes out of conflict management, where we mix that with ethnography and holism and a qualitative, quantitative look at things. And we really emphasize getting stakeholders together, and we consider ourselves stakeholders, to actually learn about each other and what are their positions and why they have these positions on a topic like climate change. And our goal has always been to foster collaborative learning, and through that, create a network of stakeholders who do not necessarily have to agree with each other, but have enough rapport and trust and share a broader common goal to make the peninsula resilient, both for the communities and the environment, that they're willing to work together. So what's key for us is we don't try to get people to agree and convince people that this is the most important or valid, but we use differences and emphasize we want to continue to learn about each other and work together. We make the point often that agreement is overrated. And so we just try to build rapport and get people to work together. That began with this collaborative science project in 2012, and it went on for 3 years. And we, at the end of that, we had built this network. And I want to emphasize that it's not just community residents network. It's a multi-level network that has both community, county, non-governmental, state stakeholders, and university researcher stakeholders. When we finished that work, it was quite clear that the stakeholders in the partnership, they wanted to not do more research. They wanted to create some interventions. They wanted to see some actions. They were tired of being studied. And so we, with funding from Maryland Sea Grant, were able to do a resiliency assessment and identify particular areas and where we could do some interventions. And in this interventions, we again did the collaborative learning process. We integrated sort of climate science with ecological and local and experience. And we identified, as you can see in this quadrant, particular areas where we thought we could suggest some interventions and involve a wide range of stakeholders in those interventions. And I'll talk about some of those in a next minute. So the key point here was to identify areas where if county, state, non-governmental organizations had resources available, they would be able to apply some of those resources to those areas. And we were able to secure some resources to create a living shoreline right along this area right here, and to do a lot of cleaning of roadside ditches and maintenance of ditches in this area in Dames Quarter, and also along this area in Chance. And I'll talk. So this was our kind of move to actually have interventions. And then we continued our effort, but we wanted to expand a little bit beyond Deal Island. And one of the things that we were interested in is in these communities on the lower eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, they're small unincorporated areas. Churches are very, very important. And so we received funding from NOAA in order to look at how churches could be used as social institutions, as mediators, as facilitators between government and local communities to help make decisions, engage in policies and programs that would help address climate change resilience. So we did this on the Deal Island Peninsula right here, but we also included areas in other counties on the lower eastern shore. And the point being that the churches are really the only social institution in these unincorporated areas that can bring people together. And in this work, we found that there are particular roles that churches can play. We also discovered that the churches have limited resources as well. Many of these are small churches and aging churches, with aging members, older members, and that this particular area with its Methodism, religion, and faith have very important missions that go beyond the material world. And so there was a limit to what material sort of interventions churches could take on. So the partnership beginning in 2012 has been driven by these three projects that I've just mentioned. But in and around those projects, other issues are important to us that we focus on. And I want to just talk about a couple of them that we think a very applied environmental anthropology, particularly in coastal areas around climate change, can make a lot of contributions. We've become very fascinated with marshes. I must admit, I never knew marshes could migrate and encroach, but they do. And these salt marshes are constantly moving and shaping and shifting and moving inland and creating, taking up upland and creating dead forests because of the saltwater intrusion. So one thing that we've been particularly interested in, that's a big concern to local community members, is there's quite a bit of environmental, natural resource management interest in protecting and managing marsh migration, but there's not at all much discussion about what happens to people's property and their livelihoods who are being affected by the movement of those marshes. And there's, because we're in a tidal wetland area and a lot of it is marsh, it's quite heavily regulated by state and federal regulations. So it's not possible for me in my flooding front yard to dig the ditch deeper or to apply some topsoil to elevate it. I would need to get a permit for that. And because of the value, the ecological value of marshes out here, that's not going to happen. So one of the issues is there's injustice and conflict between what long-term and newcomers to the area would like to do to protect their property, and environmental management regulations priorities on marshes. And that's a very, very vibrant and hot topic these days on the peninsula. In addition, another theme that has emerged from all this work, mentioned it a little bit when talking about the churches, is that you know, the sort of injustice and racial differences between white and African American communities in the area. These are quite segregated areas. They're African American neighborhoods, they're African American churches, white churches. And so there's not been a lot of focus and interest in looking at African American communities and how they're facing challenges related to climate change. So we have worked a lot with one particular church, New Revive United Methodist Church in the community of Smithville, that is facing marsh encroachment on the back of it, and they're trying to preserve their church and their cemetery, and everyone would like to help them, but it's very difficult to find the resources as well as to negotiate the environmental regulations. And here's just a quote from one of the stakeholders in that about how important these places are to the long-term residents in the area. I'm going to move ahead a little quicker here. I mentioned regulations, and I'll just quickly say that I never thought I would be so interested in regulations, but when we were able to secure funding for a living shoreline, that you'll see at the last slide, as well as ditch maintenance, it took us 2 years to get the permits to actually begin construction on those efforts. And there were multiple agencies, and I'm sure many of WAPA members working in federal and agencies in DC, you know, you're probably rolling your eyes, of course, regulations. But it is really a problem. We could probably get more support and interest, but we're really constrained about what can be done because of regulations. And that's from the perspective of this top quote is from a landowner. And this is from the county itself about how their hands are tied dealing with state and federal regulations. So regulations is a topic that the partnership is very focused on right now. And another theme is kind of the mismatch between what locals are interested in. The impacts of climate change are happening right now. It's really about the quantity of water, flooding, and higher tides and storms, and how that affects community and household health. And then at the regional level, those interests are there, but they're more in a regulatory framework, and it's more about water quality, and it's more about putting it in a larger context of the Chesapeake Bay program. So the scale is quite different, and the mismatch between them is a real challenge for our applied work.
Excuse me, Michael.
Yep.
I'm gonna stop you right there. I wanted to try and get you there at a good point to pause, and I know there will be questions from a few members of our audience, and so I would love to be able to have those entertained with any other additional details you may have.
I only have one more slide.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yep.
And we're going to turn it over to Laurie. Laurie? You there, Laurie?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Now I can hear you. All right. We're going to now have Laurie, honorable mention. Go ahead, Laurie, take it away.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to the beginning of my presentation here. Or that's going to the end, rather. Okay, here we have it. All right. Sorry for taking a while to do this. Anyway, my name is Laurie Schwady, and I first got interested in complex household structure when I did my dissertation field work in West Sumatra, Indonesia. I lived in 2 upland villages of the Minangkabau people. Anthropologists will find this interesting, as I did, because they're matrilineal and Islamic. So it's a very interesting difference between the religion and the social structure, and that just drew me like a moth. So while I was there, I was very interested in complex household structure with extended families and clans and kin and all that sort of thing. And after I finished my dissertation, I started working for the Census Bureau, and I continued my interest in complex households through my census career, applying that to households in the US across different race and ethnic groups. I worked as a survey research anthropologist at the Census Bureau for 29 years, retired in 2017, and now I'm enjoying retirement. So anyway, without further ado, let me get to this talk. The topic is complex households and the undercount of young children in the 2020 census. And I am the anthropologist, but here is a picture of some of my team members. Eric Jensen is standing. I'm standing there too. Deborah Griffin is off to the right side. Karen Deaver was the chair of the Census Bureau's task force on the undercount of young children. My teammates Scott Kanicki and Janet Wasaki could not be in this photo, but they were critical members of the team. So the outline of this talk, I'm going to give you a really short introduction to the census, which you probably know about since you just did it. Talk about the new issue of the undercount of young children, the formation of teams to study the issue, the complex households typology that I developed as part of my independent study, the research hypotheses, the findings, takeaway, and epilogue. So the census is the largest civilian mobilization in the US. We fan out to count more than 300 million people, and that's just a daunting experience. The mission is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And for all those years I worked in the Census Bureau, the culture there, everyone is really dedicated to doing the best job they possibly can in counting everyone. There is research that is done by the Census Bureau about undercounts. They're very, very open about sharing that information with everyone. So that in the 2010 census that I'm going to be talking about, it turned out that there were actually overcounts of the entire population and also of non-Hispanic whites, but undercounts of non-Hispanic Blacks, Hispanics, and the other groups. So that's a persistent problem across censuses for race groups. So the new issue that emerged from the 2010 census was that young children turned out to be the age cohort for the first time that was the highest of all age cohorts, with an undercount rate of 4.6%. That means that 1 out of 20 young children are missed in the census. And that means that with census results used for funding, that means that the young children programs are underfunded for each of the next 10 years. That's $1.5 trillion every year that goes toward communities from the census. It's a big deal. And beyond that, the young child undercount has actually worsened from 1.4% in 1980 up to 4.6% now, in 2010, while the adult count has actually improved to a slight overcount. So the big question is why? And the Census Bureau took this seriously. And the first thing that they did was to set up a new task force, set up a small interdivisional undercount of young children research team to brainstorm and conduct new statistical research with existing census data sets. So what is the issue for undercounting young children. As I said, the census is used for the federal funding. Those are some of the programs for community planning. There's also political representation, how many seats you get in the House of Representatives and how many electoral college votes you get, which is a salient issue right today. So here there was the task force, and then there's the new Undercount of Young Children research team, which had about 8 people. And then I'm talking about my small team here with mathematical statisticians, a demographer, and myself, the anthropologist. So the complex household typology is one that I developed over the years. And the definition is a complex household, for census counting that is, it's complex. It includes anyone other than or in addition to a married partner, mother, father, biological or adopted child. There are 3 types of non-complex households. Those are the nuclear and the single parent households and a person living alone. All the rest are complex. So I'm not going to read through this whole thing. This just tells you how we calculated this. I'd like to point out some types: the multi-generation with young child, the family household with young child and other relative, and the one with non-relatives. I'll be talking about those later. So the new proposal that I actually developed was to expand the complex household typology to distinguish those that do and do not have young children ages 0 to 4. We would then create custom 2000 and 2010 census data sets with the new complex household variable for every household. And then we'd run the frequencies of complex households with and with young children and cross-step them by race and Hispanic origin. And then we would link all 2010 households with other coverage data sets to identify types of households with the highest likelihood of initially missing, then adding young children. Findings. Okay, so the first hypothesis was that complex households would increase. And yes, we did find that they increased from 1990, 18.4% up to 23.1% in the 2010 census. And we tend to think that the Great Recession had something to do with that increase in complex households, more doubling up. Here are 2 maps that show you can really get a sense of how much the percentage of young children age 0 to 4 living in complex households actually grew between 2000 and 2010. The redder the area, the higher the concentration of complex households with young kids. All right, so this is kind of complicated. Let me start by saying I'm comparing 2000 and 2010 data. The 2000 is in the blue. So for the moment, please just look at the blue bars. We'll be doing exactly the same thing for 2010, but I'll explain with the blue bars. In the total population, about 34% of households with a young child were complex, 34% in 2000. Then if you look across the blue bars, you find that the white bar is lower than that. So whites had a lower proportion of households with young children that are complex. But if you look across at the rest of the blue bars, you see every other group had a much higher proportion of households with a young child that are complex. This is important because that overall total figure is often cited, but that masks all of this variation across race and ethnic groups. It's really important for us as anthropologists and others to see. Now, if you look at the green bars, it's the same thing. We see that complex households with young children were now up to 39% of all households in the US, which is amazing. And once again, white alone is below that, non-Hispanic white alone, and all the other groups are higher. Look at American Indian, Alaska Native, and look at Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, just for example, to show you the differences. Okay, so the next step to identify the young children who may have been missed in the census and should be added, if you recall your census form, question 2 that you had is an undercount probe that asks, were there any additional people staying here that you did not include when you counted the number of people in your household? So if anybody checked one of those boxes, they were thrown into a new operation called coverage improvement, sorry. And the coverage improvement operation follows up those households that marked one of those categories for potentially missed people. Then they asked a lot of questions, and if they decided those people who were missed should be added into the final counts, they were actually fed into the final census counts. So our project linked households in our census data set to the same households in this coverage data set to identify household types with young children who are missed, then added. And so remember I hypothesized earlier that complex households would have higher add rates for children than non-complex. Well, this table shows that that's the case. Complex households were 6.7 per 1,000 households that added young children, whereas non-complex were only 1.3%. The overall percent was 3.4 per 1,000. This one also is a little bit complicated. The blue bars, again, the total is on the left, and you look at the race groups across in the blue bars and similarly in the red bars. So the blue bars are the total complex households. And you see that it's down around 3 for all households. Whoops, sorry. 3 for all households. And then white alone, once again, is the outlier. Asians too are the outlier. They're low or equal to the overall average, but all the other groups are higher. So once again, young children are being undercounted at higher rates. Fortunately, we have that way to try to identify them through this coverage improvement operation. Now, if you look at complex households, you see the same general pattern across the total in all of the groups. But you notice that the rates are really high for complex households, always higher than for all complex households, for all households, especially for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander only. So these are the first findings we ever had about this. And it was so exciting to us to see these tables and to talk about what they meant and then to share them. So this is a totally new finding that we did not anticipate. Again, this is a little bit complicated. The bar charts here, again, you have the total and then the race groups going across. But at the bottom, the gray are non-complex households. That's where the whole graph is showing where young children were added in what types of households. So non-complex you see along the bottom, always less than 50%, most of them less than 35%. The blue bars at the top are for just 3 types of complex households. And you can see that overall, 62% of all of the young child adds were in those 3 types of complex households. And if you look across, whites were 50% and all the other groups were higher. So this is really an important finding about where these young children are being missed. Those 3 types are multi-generational household families, multi-generation households, those family households with other distant relatives, like nieces, aunts, brothers-in-law, that sort of thing, grandnieces, and families with any non-relatives, and multi-generational. So those are the 3 types that really emerged from the data as being very highly associated with the undercount with young child adds. So the takeaways, our hypotheses were confirmed. Complex households, both overall and those with young children, increased from 2000 to 2010. We found wide variations in the percentage increases of complex households with young kids across race and Hispanic groups from 2000 to 2010. And complex households had higher add rates for young children in 2010, both overall and within the race and Hispanic groups. And the new takeaway, here's the list of them so you can see them a little bit better. The majority of young children overall and within each of the race and Hispanic groups were in just 3 types of complex households. Those with 1 or more non-relatives included in family or non-family households, complex households that were multi-generational, and those that had distant relatives, grandparent, grandniece, cousin, and so forth, which anthropologists would pay attention to, but unfortunately the Census Bureau throws into an other relative category and they cannot be disaggregated. So the recommendation and the implementation, we recommended to the Census Bureau that they use other survey data to target areas in the country with high proportions of these types of complex households before the 2020 census. And they use those maps for special outreach, advertising, enumeration, and evaluation. And this may help to reduce the undercount of young children in the 2020 census. The Census Bureau administrators did adopt this recommendation for the 2020 census. And the epilogue, since we did our study, the Census Bureau changed that question 2 that I showed you earlier. They changed the categories to now include mention of grandchildren and non-relative children because of our findings. They incorporated complex households as a key factor in planning and enumeration training. They incorporated messages on complex households into advertising. They actually did a little experiment within the census where they sent postcards to areas with high proportions of complex households to improve the rates of young children being counted, and they think that they did. And I didn't mention it here, but they also set up a special website. They also set up a special website on the undercount of kids that you can find at www.census.gov. So that's my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurie. This has been wonderful. We have some questions from the audience for all of the all the winners. So I'd like to open it up to the audience members. I'm checking in the chat here right now. Give me 1 second. I saw a question here. This question is for you, Laurie.
Okay.
This question, Richard, maybe if you would like to ask the question or if you'd like me to ask on your behalf.
Either way is fine.
Go for it, Richard.
Great talk, Laurie.
Thank you, Richard.
Just curious, with the definition of complex households, how do you account for fictive kin? How does that get recorded, such as compadrazgo in Hispanic culture and that sort of thing?
Okay, well, complex households, when people fill out the census form, it depends on what relationship categories they choose. It's self-identification. The householder decides how to categorize each person in the household. And so they may choose a daughter for someone who's not actually related to them, who is fictive kin. But there's no way the Census Bureau can pull those out because that's the decision that's made by the respondent, and there's no evidence of that on the census form.
Okay. So
there's not a way to do that.
Well, maybe it's not relevant to the decisions that census data support. And I think that your point really illustrates the issue is you're still trusting in the respondents' worldview and their situation as they understand it.
Right. The census is based on self-identification and those identification of those in your household. So Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. There's some discussion of that in the co-edited book that I put out in 2006, that's Schwede, Blumberg, and Chan, Complex Ethnic Households in America. There's discussion of that exact issue in the chapter on whites, if you want to take a look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a good one.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Richard. We have a question for Dr. Paolisso. Michael, this comes from Marjorie. In a more politically conservative part of Maryland experiencing environmental changes, how do community residents reconcile climate change with current administration viewpoints?
A lot of them are politically conservative. Those in particular people that have been born and raised out here. So for many of them, climate change is something that is natural and is happening, and what they're concerned about is over-regulation by government that would impact on their livelihoods to address climate change impacts. So, and many of them feel that you can't really predict climate change. It doesn't mean that you don't adapt to it. So some of them don't have a problem with the current administration's approach. Others that have moved into the area, people we call born heres, do have issues with it. And so there's a division within the area between the two groups on it.
Thank you, Michael. We'd also like to give Dr. Mookherjee an opportunity to show her short video and get to the comments that she was going to show with some of her images. Would you like to share with everyone, please?
Sure. Actually, before I show the short video, I just want to make 2 points, which kind of would bring me to kind of concluding in terms of the findings and what is relevant in terms of the anthropological knowledge. And one of the things that was relevant is to focus on the post-conflict experiences of survivors rather than voyeuristic accounts of their testimonies of sexual violence. And this is something that comes out through the idea of fragments and embodied memory, which we try to bring out in the graphic novel in terms of, say, for example, on page 24 of the graphic novel, it shows how survivors refer to an oncoming storm like their experiences of the war, rather than giving a linear account of what happened. I want to show also a small clip, a kind of 4-minute clip, to show how many of the survivors' accounts, rather than being a horrific account of the survivor, the continuum of violence, something which Nancy Shepherd Hughes has referred to, brings out and what I refer to as the socialities of violence, how the violence erupts in every day in their social lives, rather than being a kind of one holistic horrific account of the experience of sexual violence. And the second point I wanted to make, and very importantly, which has been taken up by various organizations, often honor, silence, shame, stigma, kind of anthropological terms are often very holistically understood to be a kind of a effect of sexual violence among survivors. And instead I show that how stigma and shame are not just inherent to what sometimes are seen as Muslim communities, but also that they also have to be understood through their economic, political, and social context. And that is also something I bring out in the graphic novel and film, because it's important to not just understand the experiences through these hollow terms, which doesn't mean anything unless we understand how survivors or when communities are bringing up stigma and shame. And I show there's a economic, political, and historical context to that. So I can show a brief section of the clip which highlights the very kind of idea of socialities of violence of some of the lives of the survivors, which is taken from the ethnography itself. Shall I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry, my earlier version of the images. I'm not going to show the PowerPoint because I think it's something that's there in my book if anyone wants to can access it. But I think showing this little clip might give us an account of. I need to find this. My technology is not working with me today. I don't know. Show all windows. Yes, maybe that'll show. Where is I needed to. Sorry. This is. I need to show a clip from a different page.
So if you can share your, if you have what you're looking to present already on your desktop, if you want to try and share your screen.
Yeah, it's not showing that page somehow when I'm trying to share my screen. So what I'm going to do is actually I am going to do it right there, and I'm going to put that in the. This has always worked, and somehow this is not. I'm going to do that here, and
okay.
If I go to the link and I have the timings exactly, how will that show, or could Mark help?
I think I have it up, so if you'd like, I can pull it up for you. Sure.
And if you can take it to 10:10.
Okay. Let's see.
10:10 to 14:56.
All right.
Oh, great.
All right.
So we need to go
here?
to the film. Yeah, that's the website for all the graphic novel and the film.
Okay, 10:10, correct?
Yes, yes, please. Thanks, Monica.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Just before that, that's fine.
Okay.
Of their stories, Ammu? Laboni, you know about the well-known sculptor Firdausi Priyobhashini? Firdausi Priyobhashini, sculptor. During the war of 1971, Pakistani military and her colleagues at work raped her for many months. She had to go to war as she was responsible for the sustenance of her widowed mother and young siblings. After the war, she was mistakenly referred to as a collaborator by her neighbors. As a result, she and her husband, who was a liberation fighter, had to constantly change their home and cities they lived in to escape these rumors. Only in 1999, she told her daughter about 1971. She used to say, if the end of your finger is touched without your consent, the finger would burn. Imagine how it would feel if it is the rest or whole of your body. Her story and sculptures inspired many in Bangladesh, particularly the younger generation. She died in March 2018.
Moina Corin, a landless rural woman. During the war, she was raped by the Pakistani army in the courtyard of her own home. She was cutting fish when she was captured. Holding onto the wooden pole of her house, she thought, I would give my life, but not my honor. After the war, her husband took on the responsibility of cutting fish, and after her son got married, this job was passed on to her daughter-in-law. Moina hasn't cut fish since the war. Holding onto the wooden pole of her house, she says that the pole is the witness of her event. Whenever she sees the pole, she clearly sees the event of that day. In 1992, Moina gave witness against the war criminals at the People's Court. Today, she is appealing to the government to give jobs to her sons and daughters.
Chaya Rani Datta, a sex worker. During the war, Chaya's mother died and Chaya became alone and vulnerable. Taking advantage of her vulnerability, local collaborators in her village gang raped her. Chaya feels sad when thinking of her mother, as she feels her mother would have protected her and she wouldn't have been raped. She was good in mathematics, and hence after the war she started a business of supplying potatoes to restaurants. Sometime later, she decided to take up sex work herself. She follows both Hindu and Muslim religions. As a result of the rapes, she had a girl, a war baby, who is today 46 years old.
Shirin Ahmed had a government job. During the war, she witnessed her husband being killed by the Pakistani army. She was also pregnant. The military raped her and she lost her baby. After the war, she married a cousin, but she always loves her first husband and can't keep his photograph at home. Her second husband does not like it and is jealous of her love for her childhood sweetheart, her deceased first husband. Hence, she kept the photograph of her first husband in her cupboard at work. A few years ago, she retired from her job. Marjina Khatun, hospital cleaner. During the war, Marjina's brother was going away to fight. He had recently married. Look after my wife, elder sister.
When the Pakistani military came to their house, Marjina hid her sister-in-law and another beautiful cousin and put herself forward.
Where are the women in the house?
I'm here. You can take me.
Outside. For 4 months, every night, a military jeep came to pick her up to be raped and dropped her back in the morning. Send Marjina. Don't go, Marjina.
I have to go, or they will find the other women. After the war, neighbors referred to her as a collaborator, and so she left for Dhaka to find work. When I heard we were called Biranganas, I did not tell anyone, but I glowed with pride.
She married. Her children later got separated from her husband. And today, her children have government jobs. She worked as a cleaner in a government hospital and has recently retired.
The military took me by force, but they got nothing from me.
We can stop it now. Thank you. Thank you, Monica.
No, thank you. And on a follow-up to that, we do have a few questions regarding that. And then I'm going to turn it over again to Dr. Paolisso for additional questions. This question comes from, let me double check here. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. This question comes from Richard Morris. Dr. Mookherjee, if relevant, can you please explain what you envision for transfer of these methods into clinical practice? Does the graphic novel have a place in ongoing therapy with those who have been victimized?
Thank you for that question. Actually, one of the, in talking about the guidelines, in some ways the survivors themselves are setting out a template in the way in which those working with survivors, whether in clinical settings, whether in testimonial processes, need to approach them, and the way consent, the complexities of consent, confidentiality, and anonymity works. So it could be something that could work in clinical setting. And actually, one of my colleagues, Samina Mullah, her work is based on a Baltimore clinic around sexual violence survivors, and there are parallels between our work. So I think there is a way to approach the guidelines in various kinds of settings, which maintains the autonomy and agency of these survivors, and not just to see them as only horrific figures. They have gone through horrendous experiences, but that doesn't mean they don't have an idea of how they should be addressed and engaged with by practitioners, whether they're clinical or human rights activists.
Follow-on question from Marietta Baba is, thank you for your excellent work. Could the ethical guidelines be adapted to the context of human trafficking in conflict zones?
I guess so. I haven't thought through how it might be, but I think what one of the clip I'm trying to show is the way in which often survivors, whether maybe we can extend it to trafficking or survivors of sexual violence, are often imagined or thought of, often contravenes the very experiences through which, and that's the sociality of violence I'm talking about, how people live and encounter their experiences. So for Shireen, the issue was obviously the rape during the war was a horrendous account, but for her, not being able to acknowledge this childhood sweetheart who was killed in front of her after which she was raped, and was a kind of way this experience came out, or the cutting of fish or not cutting of fish by Moina itself. So there are various kinds of ways women are dealing with it on an everyday basis, which defies a kind of linear horrific narrative. So I think I'm trying to argue against that, and the guidelines provide that to enable us to avoid such kind of situations.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to Michael. Michael, you had some remaining slides that we'd love for you to share with everyone. And I have a follow-up question once you're finished as well.
Okay, I just had one more, and maybe rather than just sharing it, I'll just kind of summarize from it, and that would be easier. So I think the partnership, the challenges that we're facing in order to continue to do the work is how do we create these new collaborations with the members in the partnership that bring in resources and allow us to sustain our work in particular areas, as well as create new areas, and continue to build this kind of rapport and trust among the stakeholders. So that I didn't emphasize enough before that most of these stakeholders had never worked together before. You know, community residents don't work with state Department of Natural Resource officials, particularly for commercial fishermen in our case. So by doing the collaborative learning, it has been kind of the driver that has kept people engaged and willing to keep exploring opportunities that kind of evolve very ethnographically and organically. So that's been the challenge that we're trying to meet in the partnership to keep it going.
On that point, I have a question for you, Michael. My understanding of the general topic of climate change is that there are many climate change deniers out there. And I'm curious to know, especially since so often there are those sentiments expressed by people that are maybe more religiously involved with their faith. And I'm wondering, first of all, A, did you encounter that? And B, what were some of the conversations that transpired between those who were aware or are firm believers in climate change versus those that didn't necessarily agree with those same viewpoints? If you could elaborate on that for us, please.
Yeah, so I don't think there are people out here that deny that the climate is changing. So that climate, believer, climate denier dichotomy doesn't work very well. And on this call, I think is Shirley Fisk, and we've done some work together that also I think finds the same thing. So it's really using an anthropological lens to understand how people define climate change. So for some people, climate change they're more concerned about the governmental interventions and what it's going to bring and so they'll resist that, and they'll end up being labeled climate deniers when they in fact don't deny that the climate is changing, but they're interpreting and seeing the impacts of it through the sort of consequences for them, the economic, the political, the social, which are quite real, and they're quite vulnerable and not empowered to deal with it. We've had workshops out here, these collaborative learning workshops, where we had local pastors, we had scientists, we had a wide range of people. I don't think there was anyone in that room that didn't think that the climate changes or is changing. What drives it? What are the consequences? Were the things that differed? But we were able to talk about that in part because of rapport and all of that. So I think putting it into denier believer just doesn't get us very far. I think it's much more complex.
Thank you. There is another question. Suzanne, would you like to ask the question?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
You mentioned earlier the African American church, that they seem to be separate from the rest of the population in Beale Island. And I'm wondering, do you see things changing over time? Do you foresee any collaboration happening among the groups? It seems like, you know, we all hang together or we all hang separately, that sort of thing. So I was just wondering, are things, is there more interaction now and cooperation?
There is, and the pandemic has created it. So historically, the churches, except on Easter sunrise service, would celebrate individually, the African American and the white churches.
Right.
But since COVID, the churches have not been able to meet in their individual churches, physical structures, but out at the harbor, and they drive in and have like a drive-in car service. And it includes both white and African American churches. And so you have 3 pastors, 2 white, 1 black, present, as well as the music is from the African American church. And it's been quite a success. And people are talking that they may not go back to their original churches, which we have lots of, but they're very poorly attended and struggling financially. So, so COVID has brought the churches together and kind of blurred that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and you can see the dynamics on Sunday, this past Sunday, you could hear the music from the harbor, and you can see the traffic on the road going up and down the road is all around the time around the church service.
Great.
Michael, we have another question from Mari. Mari, would you like to ask your question directly? Okay, I'll ask. Michael, have you explored contacting local political representatives or state legislature representatives to make them aware of the negative impacts of the regulations and need to address local impacts of climate change in the deal?
Yeah, we work in part of the partnership includes county government, and our county commissioners are active in the project. They are fully aware and extremely articulate about regulations, for example. We get up more or less to the state level, some of the state agencies, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, but local elected officials and public people in public government are actually partners in our part of our stakeholders.
Thank you. And we have a question from Rob for Yannicka. Rob, would you like to ask your question? Okay, I think Rob stepped away for a second, but Rob's question is, could you comment on the wider implications of the ethical problems?
Monica, I'm sorry, I made a mistake and just shoved part of the question forward. So what I'm trying to get at, thank you, Monica, is the guidelines and other parts of this project were prompted by what you and your colleagues viewed as ethical shortcomings in some of the documentation done previously of sexual violence in the Bangladeshi war. So I wondered if you would if you wish, expand a bit on what were, in your view, the failings of the researchers' approaches, and in particular, what might be some wider implications for other research.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I'm glad you're here because I had a clarification about your question. So it's more at the end of the testimonial process what the ethical problems are. That's what you're asking, right? Yeah. So one of the issues was precisely because often the Birangona imagery was thought of as without any kin or having, you know, the horrific image of the Birangona was reiterated by often very sensationalized accounts of the life histories of the Birangonas. So many of the stories would be changed to make it more horrific because it was seen to kind of have a more resonance with the younger generation. As some of the activists would say, that, you know, no one would believe that she's a war heroine unless if she has a happily ever after end of a story. So what is seen as happily ever after is some of these stories are narrated just because they are with family members or have a established kin structure. So there's often these stories were getting changed and reenacted at national forums to kind of identify who is exactly the rape woman. And as soon as we do that, we kind of only identify, and this is the issue of, it relates to wider issues of sexual violence, conflict, and also on everyday basis, is if we only think of the figure of the survivor as someone who is identified with the wound. That's why we call it the spectral wound. So the idea of the wound kind of gives this figuration and makes the idea of stigma as kind of natural as part of this experience of sexual violence. Instead, what we find that when we ethnographically, we are identifying that stigma actually emerges in various instances of economic contestations between survivors and their communities and family members. Instead, if we think of stigma as a given as part of the effects of sexual violence, we kind of make these into kind of reified forms for forthcoming researchers coming along. So who think, and this has been a big problem within the Foreign Commonwealth Office's identification of stigma as a big effect of sexual violence. And that's been one of our biggest ways to communicate how stigma needs to be understood in the case of sexual violence, is not as something given, but something that is evoked in various kinds of contestations. And otherwise, this often leads to a kind of orientalization of this being inherent within Muslim communities as well. So that countering many of these constructions has been inherent to bringing ethnography to instruct these various kinds of constructions. I hope I answered your question. I just gave a couple of examples, but there are many other examples of that in the graphic novel.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you. And we also have a question for Laurie. Suzanne, do you want to ask again? And I have a follow-up question for Laurie after you, Suzanne.
I just want to know, what was your experience as an anthropologist at the Census Bureau? I don't think of an anthropologist on staff at the Census Bureau. I know of anthropologists working on collecting data during the census count, but and I'm a former Fed, and so I know what my experience was. It was it was up and down, but just your experience. What do you have to say?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. When I first came back from Indonesia and was looking for work, I saw an ad in the American Anthropologist newsletter for ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists to work on two projects. One of them is on the undercount of the homeless, and the other was on ethnographic studies of different populations. And at that time, we had two other anthropologists, and that the number of anthropologists grew in 2000 to be 5 of us. Now we are in, it used to be called the Center for Survey Measurement, which is in the research directorate of the Census Bureau. And the main focus there is on designing and testing questionnaires in the off years. So I had a lot of experience watching people fill out forms and asking them questions and trying to write better questions and improve census forms. But I also had a marvelous opportunity to do independent research, and that's one of the reasons that I stayed for so many years. As I mentioned, complex households was one of my interests. I was very interested in differences in race and Hispanic origin, in coverage and residence rules. And the census is such a huge undertaking that to really understand it, you have to stay for a long time. I mean, there's just so much to absorb in order to get yourself to a minimum level where you can start to even do proposals. And so that continuing interest I had in coverage by race and ethnic groups, in living situations, in household composition, all of that kind of came together over the course of my career. And it enabled me in both 2000 and in 2010 to initiate my own proposals for evaluations in the embedded in the census. And I actually did another project that won an honorable mention in 2013, 2014 on the comparative ethnographic studies of enumeration and coverage, where we sent interviewers, ethnographers, including Ruth Sandow, who's one of the participants, sent them out to the field to actually observe live census interviews and then report on whether they thought people were missed, who was missed, under what circumstances. And so I had marvelous opportunities to do evaluation research along with my questionnaire design research. And I worked on so many projects, whether questionnaire designing or whatever, over the years, that I was always thrown in with a different group of professionals from other parts of the Census Bureau. And it was a very interdisciplinary kind of setting. And I learned from them and they learned from me. And so I just found a lot of gratification in being able to do that kind of work, and especially with that independent studies. Now, unfortunately, there are not many anthropologists left in the Census Bureau right now. If anyone is interested, you would want to try to contact Dr. Patricia Gorman, G-O-E-R-M-A-N. She currently works in the division where I was. They've changed the name now. The initials are CB, like boy, A-M, CBSM. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for. The Center for Behavioral Science Methodology, I think, something like that. But she is in charge of a sociocultural group, and they are currently heavily involved in language research because people who don't speak English very well are also undercounted. So that's become the focus there. It's not just race ethnicity, it's more like those who are not speaking English well. So the work continues. Anthropologists really could have good careers there once there's a new administration.
Right.
Which it looks like we're going to have.
Let's hope.
Yes, so did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for asking.
It also answered mine because I was going to ask you about language there, Laurie, so thank you.
Okay.
I think we have time for one more question. If anyone else out there wants to quick add a message or, just let us know what you have on your mind for our 3 award winners before we wrap up the evening. But I wanted to definitely say this has been a very engaging conversation. Certainly has inspired me from the very diverse, tracks of study and research that each of you have presented, and for sure enlightening. So I'm very grateful to all of you for your participation, especially transatlantically, as it's very late for some of us, and also in light of our current events that are taking place that are, a lot is still unknown that, affects many of the topics that we're discussing this evening, if not all of them. So unless there
Hi, Monica?
Yes?
Yeah, can I make a very quick announcement, which is quite germane?
Please do.
Hi, and thanks for, my internet has been cutting off and on all night, so thanks for getting me in and out. And in case it drops now, I'll email. But as everybody knows, that Bob Wolf and Shirley Fisk years ago did a anthropological praxis, and it's been something that people have asked us for at conferences and stuff. So we are in the final stages of actually putting together Charlie Chain on the call, and many faces you see and people who have their videos turned off are going to be represented in the book. We got the last 10 years. We've got all of the awardees to agree in the last 10 years to participate. And it looks like the book was actually due at the first of the month. We're not going to quite make that deadline because we finally did get our last participant to submit a chapter this morning due to Charlie's bulldog-like determinedness. So we are hopefully going to have it submitted by the end of this month, and we'll keep everybody abreast, but we haven't wanted to make the big announcement yet because just we wanted to make sure we had everything in order. So a new book theoretically at this point is going to come out at the beginning of 2022. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everybody. And thanks to everybody who participated. And it's good to see some of you in COVID person. Yes.
Terry, what's the title?
Charlie, what's the title? You'll have to unmute yourself. It's something, it's Profiles of Anthropology or something, Profiles of Praxis. Charlie made it up. It's similar to what it was, but I think it's Profiles of, or maybe one authors remembers it.
Profiles of American, Profiles of Anthropological Praxis.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And there are 21. And poor Laurie wrote 2 excellent chapters, but they got condensed into one big chapter because a lot of the parallels were similar. But there were 20, I think there's 20 or 21 chapters now representing, like I said, the last 10 years. But Mary Clark is there, LTG is there, and a couple other ones I think I threw there. Shirley and Bob are going to write. Shirley, if she's still here, she's just getting ready to send us in the foreword for the book. I know she's promised that any day now, and we're putting together the final.
Oh, I think Terry froze.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, we'll thaw him out.
Thanks for being ready with the name, Laurie.
Well, we missed your final sentence there, Terry. If you wouldn't mind repeating that, please.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
I blame it. Yeah, I can blame that on the election too. It wasn't anything meaningful. So just thanks for everybody and keep an eye out for the book.
Okay. Thank you so much, Terry, for putting that plug in, and everyone, be sure to stay tuned for that. We're all excited for that to come out. Any final last questions before we wrap it up for the evening? Marjorie, did you have a question? Did I inadvertently miss your question?
Hi. I guess I could put my visual on. Hello.
I'm sorry to call you out there, Marjorie. I just want to make sure you weren't skipped.
Yeah, no, I was curious if any of the presenters were changed by the work. Perhaps you had assumptions going into your work, but after the work you did it change you in any way? Personal thoughts you had, or again, assumptions that surprised you as you went about your work? And sorry, it's a last minute thing here. I don't prolong the evening.
We want to make sure we include everyone. Thank you, Marjorie.
Well, I'll just start. It changed me so much that I moved out here. And I continue to peel away different layers of meaning and understanding about what it's like to live in this area and participate and observe and engage. And it certainly has challenged me in defining and understanding my roles as an applied anthropologist. I'm really crossing a lot of boundaries very, very quickly and not seem to be too concerned about it.
I can answer the next one. I went armed with various feminist sensibilities, which I had from much earlier on, and I was assuming that there would be complete silence, and there wasn't. And that was my first kind of unlearning of my entire project itself. But then to ask why were women talking about it, and that unraveled different kind of things and lessons for me. On a personal level, I think I started going white right after my fieldwork. I see that as a direct effect of my work. This is lockdown hair. I finally embraced it after these last 6 months, but I've been going gray for a very, very long time.
Laurie?
All right. I don't think I was changed in my assumptions going into it, but this was the last project that I did at the Census Bureau in my career. And it was one of the most satisfying of all because of the way that I was able to work with my team members. I learned so much from them along the way, and we were just a very harmonious team. And if there's a way to go out in retirement, that's the way to do it. So I'm very grateful to them. And Monica, I would like to thank you for putting this together, and Suzanne for leading this, and Rob for leading the whole Praxis competition. I appreciate all the work that you did, and I'm honored that you felt my project warranted an award. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. That's very kind of you. And on that note, I think we have all collectively learned so much this evening. I know I definitely have. And it keeps me motivated and productive to just continue learning something new every single day. On that note, I want to also say a big thank you to our own harmonious team, Suzanne, as well as Rob, Matt, who is behind the scenes, as well as our program committee, and of course, all of our audience members out there in Wapa land. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're at the top of the hour, and so I want to respect everyone's time and wish you all a great evening, and a special thanks to our guest speakers. We are so privileged to have you join us this evening from all of your respective homes. So wishing everyone a good night or good morning, depending on where you are. Please continue to stay safe, and we will see you next month, the first week in December, as it relates to the Anthropology of Resilience. So please stay tuned for that with more details via email. This is Monica signing off. So I hope you all
Can I say a brief word of thank you?
Thank you. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Can I say a brief word of thank you to everyone, and also for Terry to leading, and all the other editors leading the volume as well. And thank you to all of you. It's been a fantastic evening, and all strength to the award going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And
Bye-bye.
thanks, Michael and Laurie.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.